Now, if you've ever been given advice for anything in life, you might have heard the phrase, or as long as you learn something from it, then it doesn't matter what the outcome is, or something along those lines. What does that actually mean? Because a lot of people, they would kind of beat a dead horse, and they'll just keep on doing the same thing over and over again because that's what they've been told they should do to improve something. So for example, you do a lot of questions and that's going to increase your grades when it comes to VCE subjects. But what does that actually mean to improve? How do I know how to improve? And how do I know if I am improving? It's a difficult question because there's so many different ways to even quantify and classify success, and everyone's definition is different. For example, someone might be happy with an 80% on a certain test, someone might be only be happy if they get 95 plus. So how do I actually know how to improve? And where do I go from where I am right now? Because right now, what is it, May? And it's maybe about a quarter of the way through VCE, and you might be unhappy with where you're at the moment. But how do you know where to go from here? Because that's the most important thing. The most important thing is not necessarily what I've been doing, but where am I going? And am I now on the trajectory where I'm going to receive the scores that I need? Not necessarily have I received the scores so far, because you can't change the past. But how do I know where to go from here? It's $1 million question, right? Because that question, if you have the answer to it, is going to allow you to improve your grades to a point where you're actually going to be satisfied with where you're at in year 12. When we think of people who are insane, we usually think of people who are crazy, right? Now, there's a famous definitional quote for people who are insane. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So are you insane? Are you insane and you do keep on doing the same thing over and over when preparing for a test, and you keep on getting the same results, but you keep on expecting different results? Are you in that boat? Most people are, and I used to be. And the reason for that is because I didn't know how to study properly. I was just told by everyone else around me, and was kind of inferred through people who are usually high achievers, is that there used to be a correlation between the amount of work that they would do and the results that they would get. But yeah, there's obviously a correlation between that. But when you're learning something and when you're studying and when you're just trying to achieve any outcome in general, obviously, in general, people who are doing more work usually get higher results. But why is that? The reason for that is because they're not necessarily doing more efficient work, they're just doing more work, and that work results in more efficient work. So I'll give you an example. Let's say if you have two workers, right? You have worker A and you have worker B, and both of them work at some sort of factory. And worker A and worker B both work 8 hours. And let's say worker A is at 50% efficiency. So if you imagine someone who's working 8 hours at 50% efficiency, then they're working 4 efficient hours. But then if you have worker B, who also works 8 hours, but is only at 25% efficiency, then that person has only done 2 efficient hours. So even though both people did the same amount of work, or they had the same time allocated to work, worker A did double the amount of efficient hours because they were just more efficient with their time. So the secret to succeeding is not necessarily just doing more work, even though that will generally work. I mean, I shouldn't be confusing the phrases work and work, but it will. If you do more work, you are guaranteed to get higher results unless you're at 0% efficiency. Because even if you're at a really low efficiency, let's say 10% efficiency, and you double the amount of work that you do, then you'll double the amount of efficient work that you'll do. But it's not the most productive way, and it's not the most optimal way to increase your grades in VC or just succeed in anything in life. What you need to do is you need to focus on not only increasing the amount of time that you spend on something, because there's only the amount of time that you have left in a day, or there's only a finite amount of time that you have in a day. You need to focus on being more efficient with your time and figuring out, how do I actually get to where I need to be in terms of my knowledge, in terms of my test taking abilities, in terms of my confidence? How do I increase the efficiency of improving those things in my time, more so than just focusing on the amount of time that you study? Even though I say this, but most people don't even study enough anyway. But it's not necessarily, yeah, people should be studying more than what they should be. That goes without saying. But they should focus on not only that, but also being more efficient with their time as well. Now, I'm not saying that I have the perfect formula to learn or to teach, but I can tell you some low-level tips that not only I've implemented, but also I have my students implement, and their scores, and not only their scores, but just their general knowledge when it comes to the topics has skyrocketed. And that knowledge and that fundamental base that they build of knowledge is what actually gets people to succeed, because it means that you can apply those skills and that skill set just to any problem that comes your way. And you're not rote learning how to solve certain things, because as soon as you get thrown something that is way out of left field, then you're not going to know how to solve it, because you haven't rote learned that exact process. And that's impossible. You can't rote learn the process to something that you don't know is coming your way. So for example, when you enter a SAC or you enter an exam, no one knows what questions are coming their way. So you can't just rote learn everything. You have to be able to be adaptable and to take any question that you get and be able to break it down into its fundamentals, which is what every question in VCE methods and just in VCE in general can be boiled down to, just the fundamentals that you've learnt. So when people say they were asked a question that they didn't specifically learn in class, oh, my teacher didn't learn this, my teacher didn't teach me that, then, well, that's the point. That's the point, because if you just knew every question that was going to be on the test, then there wouldn't be a point of having a test in the first place. So the point of a test is to test you on things that are outside of the box, but when you boil it down, it's exactly the same concept that you learned in class. So the first step would just to accept that you're going to be asked questions that you're not going to be familiar with. And that's fine, because you're going to use the skills that you've developed to try and answer the question in the best way that you know. So that would be the first thing. Don't expect questions to always be easy. They're meant to be difficult. And even if you look at an exam, I can't speak on behalf of your school, because if you're watching this, you're probably at a certain level of school, and there might be schools that are excelling higher than yours, and there might be schools that are not excelling as high as yours. And usually tests and SACs and whatever, they're relative to the school's level. So that's why I say that. But in terms of an exam, everyone gets the same exam, and the questions are made in a way that some are meant to be easy and some are meant to be more difficult. And the more difficult ones, if you look at the exam distribution or the score distribution for those questions, you'll see that a maximum of 1 to 2% of people will get those upper end of questions right. So imagine 1 to 2% of people in the whole of VCE methods get those questions right. It's not a lot of people. So don't expect that you can just answer every question. And if you can't answer every question, it's not that big of a deal, unless you're aiming for literally a 50 raw, which is obviously for a certain level of people, but we're not here to aim for that 50 raw, unfortunately, sorry to say. But you can aim for as high as your limit. So when it comes to knowing everything before a SAC or an exam, it's not to, I'm going to know exactly the exact process to use straight away when answering this question, because it's just unrealistic. After a few minutes, then the top students will be able to kind of simmer with some ideas, they'll give something a go, and then eventually something will break through and work. But that only comes with the fundamental understanding of a certain concept. And that's something that most teachers don't really emphasize. And it is a bit of a problem, because you're just rote learning. I'll give you an example, right? Because this is one no one really understands. They know how to use it all the time, it's fine, but they don't really understand how it actually works. And I'll explain why this is a problem. So imagine the determinant, right? Everyone probably knows what the determinant is. You could tell me that the determinant is b squared minus 4ac. And if b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, then you have no solutions to your quadratic equation. If b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0, then you have one solution. And if b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, then you have two solutions to your equation. So that's fine. You can apply that to any quadratic problem. Perfectly fine. But then what if you get a question where you have a cubic equation and you have to determine how many solutions this cubic equation has with a linear or something like that? Or Even harder still, what if you have a cubic equation with a parameter? I'm trying to explain this question, but hopefully it's coming through. Let's say you have a cubic equation with a parameter, and then you need to work out for what values of the parameter you have a certain number of x-intercepts for that cubic. Would you know how to do it? Most people would just straight away think of determinant because they've associated number of solutions with the determinant. Sorry, I started there. They've associated the number of solutions with the determinant, therefore they're going to try and use the determinant. But the determinant, is it determinant or discriminant? Discriminant. I think I've been saying determinant. The discriminant only works, my bad. The discriminant only works for quadratic equations. So how do you do it for a cubic? Now, if you actually knew where the determinant came from, you would probably be able to know how to actually solve that question. But most people just know, okay, b squared minus 4ac, that's the discriminant. Therefore, I'm just going to use what I've learned in class, what my teachers taught me. And it's not really maybe I'm making that to be that it's students' fault for knowing that or for not knowing that, but it's not really, because I guess students have an expectation that whatever they hear in class is whatever they need to know, but realistically that's just not the case, because VCE is always a competition. So you're always ranked against everyone else. You can only do as good as how you compare to with everyone else around you. So if everyone else is doing more work and everyone else has more knowledge than you, then you're going to be like left in the crowd. And if everyone is not as good as what you'd expect, then you'll be higher. It's just a ranking system. But if you knew, let's just go back to the problem. If you knew where the discriminant actually came from, then you would have no issue answering the cubic question because you can apply exactly the same concepts to the cubic equation. So just to clarify, the discriminant comes from the quadratic formula. Because if you imagine the quadratic formula, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. So do you notice that whatever's underneath the square root, or what is underneath the square root, is b squared minus 4ac? That's a discriminant. So if the discriminant is equal to 0, imagine what happens to your solution. If the discriminant is equal to 0, then the square root is 0. You're not plus or minusing anything. Therefore, your only solution is negative b over 2a. So that's how you get one solution when b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0. And then if b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, then you have a non-zero value in there. Therefore, you're plus or minusing a non-zero value. Therefore, you're getting two solutions. Negative b plus or minus the square root of blah, 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 whatever the formula is. And then if b squared minus 4ac is negative or less than 0, then what happens? You have the square root of a negative value, therefore no solution. So that's how the discriminant is actually developed. And if you knew that, then you're not going to have a problem thinking about how the cubic works in exactly the same way, because if you had generic solutions, then you can apply exactly the same concept. Or if I don't want that solution to exist, then I need to consider when it's undefined. Or if I want that solution to exist, I need to consider when it's non-zero, or something like that. Maybe I'll just put a problem in the description. I'll just upload it to the school community. Link in bio to access the free community. But my point is that if you understand things on a fundamental level and how things are developed, then you should be able to apply those same fundamentals and that same development process to other types of problems. I'm actually really hoping that problem makes sense, because it actually is a really good example, and it is something that you should consider as well, because a lot of people don't understand how that actually works. They just think, okay, number of solutions, discriminant, but that only works for quadratic equations. If you're trying to do it for any other equation, it won't work anymore. But consider how the discriminant is actually developed, and then see how those skills can actually be applied to different types of functions. So I talked about a cubic. You could do exactly the same thing for a circular function. You could do exactly the same thing for an exponential function. You could do exactly the same thing for a logarithmic function. But the problem is that what students think is that they're going to encounter examples for each of those things before their test or before their SAC or an exam. But that's just unrealistic. You can't cover every single example. You would like to. In a perfect world, you would. But unfortunately, that's just not the case. And you have to develop those fundamentals to be able to apply to any sort of problem. And that's just the way things are, unfortunately. But that would be my first piece of advice, and my only piece of advice for this video, because this video is already very long. Just develop the fundamental understanding behind everything. I'll give you 2 to 3 things that you might not have the fundamental understanding behind, but it'd be really important to understand in order to apply those skills to different problems. So the first one is the one I already talked about. Learn how the discriminant works and try and apply it to a cubic problem where you're trying to determine for what parameter value you have a number of x-intercepts for. Again, I'll post these problems in the School community. I'll make them up once I post this video, and they'll be there for you to try. So that's the first thing to think about, how the discriminant is actually developed. I've already explained it to you, so that's question 1 done. Question 2, understand where the first principles for derivatives actually comes from. You might know the formula for the first principles of a derivative, but do you actually know how that formula works? I know some teachers teach it, but I know some teachers don't at the same time. So understand how that formula actually comes about when it comes to determining the gradient of a tangent of an equation. I'm pretty sure it might be in the textbook. But see, that's the thing. It's in the textbook, but people still don't read it, and they don't understand how the derivative actually comes about. If you understand how the derivative comes about, then you'll have no problem understanding limits. You won't have a problem understanding continuity. You won't have a problem understanding differentiability and all these other niches within differentiation. And the last thing is circular functions. This is the biggest one that people don't know. They don't know that sine, cos, and tan are derived from the unit circle. And they don't know that you can literally evaluate the sine, cos, and tan values of certain angles literally by getting the x or y coordinate or the y over x coordinate of the unit circle at that certain angle. So again, the video is on School as well. I'm in the process of editing it. I'm hoping that by the time I upload this, it's uploaded and ready. But people don't know that it's literally in the name, circular functions. Why is it called circular functions when we're talking about sine, cos, and tan, which has to do with triangles? It's because people don't understand that sine, cos, and tan come from circles, or comes from the unit circle. And literally every single problem that you have when it comes to trigonometry, or every single problem that you can't understand, for example, if you don't understand how to solve equations with a domain, if you don't know how to solve equations without a domain, if you don't know how to sketch, all those problems are actually solved if you understand the unit circle and you can apply the same concept to the unit circle. So these are just fundamental things that a lot of people don't know. And I'm not saying if you don't know it, you're necessarily going to fail, but you have a higher likelihood to succeed if you have these fundamental understandings to every concept, rather than just rote learning the processes for specific problems that you've encountered.